Okay, we're going to move along, and our next seam is going to be the flat fell seam. So we learned the French seam, which is a really nice couture, higher end seam finish that we might do on women's wear, like a delicate silk or a dress, something like that. So it isn't really a seam that you would see done on menswear, though obviously, men have high-end things as well, like a nice button-down shirt, and you don't see any frayed edges on the inside of that button-down shirt. So how do they do it? They do what's called a flat fell seam, which is similar to a French seam, but just put together a little bit differently, not quite as delicate, a little different process, and also makes it extra sturdy, kind of like a top stitch, makes it a good strong seam. So really good choice for menswear, flat fell seam, and it's what you'll see on any button-down shirt, often even on women's button-down shirts as well. It's sort of the standard way that they sew those. So we'll start with the same thing. We've got 2 pieces of muslin prepped that are 10 inches long times 4.5 inches wide, okay? And with this one, we'll go back to sort of normal and we'll sew it at a 1/2 inch. So we'll put 2 edges together like we do, and I'll pin it perpendicular to the way I'm sewing, which is this direction, so opposite of the way I'm sewing. And I'm putting the pins in at the ends and then one in the middle to keep these pieces together. Okay, so I'll just sew a regular 1/2 inch all the way down, a normal sort of stitch, setting me up for anything. Okay, so I'll come about 1/4 inch from the edge of my fabric, put my presser foot down, hold on to my threads, walk those first few stitches to get it started. My pin is kind of in the way right away, so needles down, pick the presser foot up, and I could pick my pin out and then go right back in there. There we go. Get that good and ready. Turn my machine back on, and I'll sew with the foot pedal. And I'm just gliding this at that 1/2 inch mark, 4/8, and get to my next pin, needle down, presser foot up, pull the pin out, presser foot back, sew the rest. Just keeping it at a 1/2 inch, coming up on that pin, the last pin. So needle down, presser foot up, pull the pin out, presser foot back down, and finish it off. Okay, so my needle's down in this last here, so I'll just walk it towards me to pull the needle up, presser foot up, and clip the threads. So I've got a 1/2 inch from the edge. I'll just push out any gathers that have happened. Okay, so regular 1/2 inch seam. Go ahead and clip about 2 inches from the edges. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and press this seam open. Okay, so remember that this is our good side, this is our back side, and I'm just going to press the seam allowance with, see if I can get it with my hands. Press the seam allowance open all the way down. Okay, so come over here to the iron, and I'll finger press it. To start, make sure that I've pulled my fabric open so I'm not locking in any wrinkles, and I'll just press that really smoothly down from the back, and then I always flip it to the front and hit it there too, and make sure I don't have any wrinkles of fabric or folds of fabric locked into that seam. Okay, really nice and neat. So I've got a regular seam here. And now we're going to do some prep, just like we did for the French seam, to set this up for a flat fell. So remember how in the French seam we trimmed it down? We trimmed from the edge to get rid of some of our excess fray, because the goal of that seam was to encapsulate the seam allowance inside itself, right? So our goal here is something similar. We want to encapsulate all the seam allowance so that we don't see it. But what we're going to do is trim down just one side of the seam allowance, okay, not both. So you might at this point actually look at your sample and decide which one's already smaller. I would suggest trimming that one, right? If you've got one, like I can almost see, look at this, really, really subtle, but see how this is a little thinner than that. I mean, I'm talking really subtle, but you can really see it up there, right? This side got a little fat for a minute, and this side is a little less. So I want to keep that bigger side, okay? And this is going to be the side that I'll trim. And just like with the French seam, I'm going to cut about half, okay? You don't want to get too close, because if you get too close, it'll just unravel completely and your seam will come apart. But we just want to cut off some of this fray. So let's cut about half with our really sharp scissors that are going to make our lives easy, okay? So see, I'm going to cut just this one side. Really nice and slow. I feel like it's harder because you're only cutting through this one layer. So see how I'm kind of holding this to give myself some tension, right, as I go. I cut about halfway, really straight if you can, so that it doesn't cause it to fray even more. And I'll kind of move a little as I go. Here's my extra tail. And just cut all the way down. Really nice and neat, taking your time. Okay, so I get rid of this extra, and now I've got this. This looks a little choppy here, but as straight as you can. Mine went a little wonky, but if I don't mess with it too much, it's okay. It still won't fray. So now I've got a nice big fat side and a nice little thin 1/4 inch side. And what I want to do is to now take this side that's big and fold it in half towards itself, okay? Because what's going to ultimately happen is that my goal is to flip this over. If you can see, let me kind of show you on one edge. To flip it over and encapsulate that other side in it, okay? Similar to the way we had the French seam, right? Where this was inside. So maybe I'll show you from here and you'll kind of see, right? So imagine if I take this bigger side and fold it over this other one and then press it here, I can now sew very close to the top, and from the outside it looks really nice, and from the inside it'll look really nice. And you won't even have that little flapping piece like we did in the French seam. It'll actually all be sewn down, and you'll see it similar to a top stitch. You'll see that top stitch that'll go through all the layers, okay? So the way that I do this is I start by pressing this bigger piece, the one side of the seam allowance that we didn't trim. I press it in a turn towards itself, okay? So maybe just like fold it in half. If I can show you kind of how I'm doing this, right? I've got it, I'm just folding it in towards the seam about in half, or a little less than half. See, I'm kind of just doing it with my hand, and I'm going to press this down, okay? And if I press it, it'll be easier. Obviously, like there's ways to do this where you don't even have to press it. You can just kind of, you know, fold it and sew it as you go. But like with most things, I think the preparation and pressing really sets you up. Okay, so I'm going to come over here to the iron and fold this kind of delicately with my hands. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to be ironing the little bits that I've folded, okay? And so I can start, you can kind of see it by like getting it started, and then I'll push the rest of the way up as I go, okay? So I'm just pressing that towards the seam, towards the center, pressing it just about in half. Okay? And again, if it's not listening or behaving, just shoot it with some steam. Go nice and slow. This is a many-step project. Okay, so you can see I've got it pressed where this is folded right in half towards itself, okay? Towards that other baby seam that we cut. So now I can fold it once more in that direction, right? And actually catch this little piece inside of it so that when I fold it, it's all caught in there, okay? So again, you can kind of set this up. See how I'm lapping it. I'm letting it take it like a little sandwich and catching it in there, okay? And now it's in there, and I could sew along that edge and lock it all in, okay? And again, you could do this without pressing it. I strongly suggest that you press it, that you prep it over here and get it ready so that then when you go over to the sewing machine, your life is just going to be so much easier. Your hard work is mostly done for you. So I have just kind of hand pushed that trimmed side of the seam allowance in to my folded side. It feels like it's all good, and now I'm going to press it down again. Really don't let this move on you. Really control it. I'll say this about so many things. Make sure that you're controlling the fabric, you're controlling your machine, and it's not the other way around. No excuses. You're the human. It should be in control, okay? And I can even hit this again from the outside like I like to do, really making sure that this is listening to me. Oh, I see some of my little fold came undone. So I'll just make sure that is flawless before I go over to the machine. Okay, I feel good about it. So it's folded down, it's gorgeous. This is going to end up being the outside. This is my inside. The fray is all caught inside there. So my goal now is to sew very, 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 very close to this edge all the way down so that I capture all of the fray inside, okay? So this is where we are not going to use any guides on the sewing machine plate, because even the presser foot, we want to get so close that we won't even be able to use anything. So this is going to be our goal, is to get as close to that edge as possible without going over it. If there is a space where even we come over for a minute and we don't capture this, the whole thing is lost. The fray is going to come out, the stitch is going to come out, it won't work. So our goal is to stay right on that line, okay, as close as we can. So let's say, you know, definitely within a 1/16 of an inch, an eighth of an inch, very close to that edge, okay? So I'll show you what I mean. I'll set it up. Let me see if I can get you a little closer. So I'm going to come about, you know, 1/4 inch from the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to look and see where my needle actually comes down, where it hits. I'm going to kind of check. See, I'm not going down all the way. I'm just kind of checking and seeing, and I want my needle to hit here. You know, right in that spot. Show you with my marker. You know, right there, very close to the edge, so we can capture everything. So if I feel like my needle's in a good spot, I'm going to drop it down. I'm going to walk those first few stitches, definitely. You could walk this whole thing if it makes you more comfortable. I've got it started, and now I'll go ahead and turn on my machine and we'll sew this with the foot pedal. And I'm just keeping it very close to that edge. Trying to make sure I'm not going over. Go right off the edge, pull my needle up, press her foot up, clip my thread, and let's see if we did it. Moment of truth. So there we go. I have sewn very, very, very close to that edge without going over. I even sewed a little closer than I drew with my marker. But the real test is if any of that fray is coming out, and it isn't. See how close I've sewn, that I have captured it all in that tiny, tiny fold, right? So I can check, test, and this is the front. It looks like a top stitch, right? Like, because you see your seam, and here is another stitch on top about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So it really looks just like a top stitch. But on the back, it's all folded up. You don't have any flap of seam allowance. It's really smooth. This is why you see this on men's shirts. It's on the sleeves, it's on the side seams, it's on all the seam finishes, right? This is a really great one to do because it just doesn't leave anything in the way, and it makes your seam extra strong. You would have to rip through this kind of top stitch seam first and this stitch before you've got, you know, a hole, before you've exposed parts of your skin. So it's a really nice seam, again, popular for menswear. What I would do now is obviously press that once again, just to make sure that it's nice and flat. So press it from the back, press it from the front, and then you're set with your flat fell. The front is this one that has the top stitch looking stitch, and the back is where you've got 2 stitches.